Hello, good morning everybody. My name is Dave Campbell. I am an M365 consultant here at CompanyNet, working in Microsoft technologies for many, many years, as you can tell from the grey in my beard, which is always a good sign of age and maturity, I find. Today we're going to talk about provisioning within M365. We're going to talk about in fact, we'll go to the agenda and we'll step through what we're going to talk about today. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about what is provisioning. So what do we mean when we talk about provisioning? And what are we provisioning as part of that provisioning model? Then we'll talk about provisioning for M365. So specifically what we're here to talk about today is about how we provision, why provisioning is important, and then also some methods that we can utilize for provisioning. So whether that's some out-of-the-box tools within M365, whether that is custom tools, or whether that's something like our enterprise level tool, which is proven. Then we're going to have a little bit of a demo. In the demo, I'm going to just show a couple of things around taking control within your tenant to ensure that we're getting on top of sprawl of teams and group creation, etc. So a few kind of tips and tricks there. But yeah, so the demo will talk a little bit about how we can kind of gain control. So tips and tricks about how we can implement capabilities that can control sprawl within your estate. But then we'll also talk about Teams apps as well, and how we can control Teams apps within the organization. What's the right thing to do when it comes to the availability of apps within Teams, and other kind of good kind of things we'll discuss. And then we'll come back to the slides, and then we'll talk briefly around enterprise provisioning. And that's where we'll talk a lot about Proven, which is one of the tools that we kind of have built and designed and created and deliver. What it does and how that can help with scalable provisioning. And then just finally, just a little bit of a next step slide. So what you can do as next steps, what we can help you with as well from a next steps perspective. And then we'll open up for Q&A at the end. And as Taras mentioned, Paul McGonagall's on. And Paul McGonagall is one of our technical leads here, developer and architect, and very many hats. So he'll be able to answer any questions that we have around the enterprise architecture and the enterprise provisioning. Excellent. So let's move on to what is provisioning and why do we need it? So I suppose one of the kind of key messages here is that provisioning allows us to deliver M365 components in a structured and controlled method or manner, often with the introduction of automation. Now, what we talk about with this is we're talking about our M365 groups, we're talking about our SharePoint sites, we're talking about our teams. And that provisioning model or provisioning in a whole is allowing us to kind of, I suppose, control the process from start to finish. So instead of being a free-for-all, people can come along and create teams, create groups without any governance around that. That's what kind of causes a lot of the sprawl across a lot of organizations. So having a proper provisioning model will kind of help with that. So with a provisioning model, we can provision SharePoint sites, teams, and M365 groups. We can control and provisioning Teams apps, which I'll kind of show you a bit about during the demo. We'll talk a lot about, I suppose, the best way to control that from the outset, but then bringing in things like approval mechanisms and assessment of third-party apps as well as part of that, just to ensure that the apps that we're delivering within Teams are not taking our data outside of our tenant, or they're not, recently been attacked or hacked, or anything that's too scary for them to be used within our Teams environment. And during the demo, I'll talk a bit about some of the kind of custom templated apps that we can use as well as part of the Microsoft Teams apps templates. And then automating the process and introducing self-service. So, with all this locking down of the kind of the ability to create a team or the ability to create a SharePoint site, what we kind of introduce is that automation engine, that self-service capability of people to request these types of workspace to work within. So, we'll talk about that. We'll in the demo, and we'll talk about that later in today's slides. But it's important that, as we're locking down the capability to, organically create teams and, create teams for Benny's birthday party or teams for the best dogs of CompanyNet and that sort of thing, we're also giving the capability to kind of request a kind of team. And we can be very kind of granular about what we're asking people during that process. Is it going to talk about sensitive information? So that allows us to control it a bit further, maybe apply a sensitivity label and things like that to it. So it's really important that we do this, but it's really important that we give the capability to the user base to allow them to request things with ease. Cool. So why provisioning? So why is it important to use controlled provisioning? And there's a few kind of key points with this. What I've mentioned already is controlling that sprawl across Teams, SharePoint, and Azure Active Directory. And this really is one of the main kind of drivers. I think if many kind of large organizations or medium organizations that, have been expedited enablement of Teams, maybe during the pandemic, but they've not put any thoughts or any kind of controls in place as to who can create Teams and SharePoint sites, etc. You can imagine that, teams are created for the same thing. They're created for, non-work specific things, which maybe should live in Yammer or, various other kind of reasons. And then that number of total manageable entities, so M365 groups, Teams, sites, modern SharePoint sites with M365 groups, there's no control there. So we have all of these really, kind of vast amounts of kind of entities that we need to manage, but we have no governance around that. And getting control of that after it's happened is challenging. It's really challenging because we need to understand what's out there currently. We need to understand what our current model with governance is, if there is any governance, and then we need to kind of rein that in to start kind of applying our kind of controlled mechanisms in the right way. So you can imagine that if we've got thousands or hundreds of kind of these entities out there, that's a lot of management and administration overhead that we need to think about if we need to then reel that back in after the fact. So controlling sprawl at the outset is ideal, but controlling sprawl at any point in your team's adoption is the right thing to do. So it's making sure that we're kind of doing that. And as I kind of mentioned there, it's also about duplication of data. So as you can imagine, when we're allowing people to create these workspaces, these areas where they're kind of maybe storing files or they're having conversations about files, we don't really have any monitoring or any kind of communication around there. So if someone from the finance team creates a M365 group or a team, should we say, for their finance team, but then maybe Susan or Stephen has already created one as part of their kind of morning activities, then you now then have two areas where no one really knows where to go. They really, maybe it's got the same data in there, the same things are being shared, the same things are being talked about. And if you magnify that by, 10, 20 times, depending on, how big your organization is, it's really key that's avoided at all kind of avenues. So again, really playing back into that controlled provisioning and controlled management of those entities. I mean, things like naming conventions and policies, retention, sensitivity policies, they all need to be factored into this provisioning model from the get-go, or when you're reining things in a bit. Introducing self-service automation and approvals to remove hard dependencies. So when we introduce a kind of provision model, there's instantly, if we don't think about all the governance and the self-service around that, there's instantly a overhead with, or a bottleneck with the department or the area of the business that's managing those requests. So IT teams, or maybe it's HR or someone who's managing the request as they come through. So bringing in self-service or a mechanism where people can request an area can be totally driven by automation. If it's going to discuss sensitive or business sensitive information, then we can apply approvals to that as well, so that when someone requests of a team, that it goes through an approvals process before it's then created and distributed and made available to the people that are requesting it. And we'll talk about some of the mechanisms that we can use for self-service in a moment. But some of the capability out the box in M365 is fantastic. It's not all singing, all dancing, so you can't do everything, and that's why we'll talk about Proven in the kind of second half of today's session, where we can manage kind of memberships, we can manage sensitivity labels that are applied to these areas that we're creating, just so we've got that governance layer over the top. So I'll talk about this a bit later. But this ownerless model, which is something that's coming and being talked about quite a lot at the moment, bringing in self-service, bringing in automation, bringing in approvals to our process really allows us to even envision that ownerless model, if that's something that we're aiming to achieve. And then just secondary to that, thinking about our Teams areas, thinking about our SharePoint sites and Azure Active Directory is all well and good and mandatory and a requirement that we need to kind of to focus on. But one of the secondary things is controlling our Teams apps as well. So as you can imagine, when I first started talking about Teams apps to customers, it was 600 apps that were available in the Teams App Store. We're now looking at 1,000, coming on 2,000 apps that are now available. And they're not all certified or published by Microsoft. There are a number of third-party applications out there. And these third-party applications, they're not just iframes to the cloud service. They could be, taking the data that you're sharing with that Teams app and storing it in their cloud service, and that could be business critical data. So having governance and a process when it comes to our Teams apps is a key functionality that we really are keen to discuss with a lot of our customers at the moment. And a lot of this starts with blocking third-party apps initially until that process is developed and introduced, and only allowing apps that are certified or Microsoft applications, which the data is stored within our own tenant. But then there's this whole process, which I'll describe a bit later as well, about how we can then assess an application for introduction to the organization, and then how we can control that. So what policies do we need to configure to allow these Teams apps to be gone through a process to approve or to get access to them, but then also to make that application available to the people who need that application. So we'll talk about that a bit later. Cool. And then governance, I've said it so many times already this morning. Governance is the whole purpose of kind of getting, this kind of layer or this model in place. We need to manage these resources. We need to manage the security of our groups, our teams, and our SharePoint sites, and having that governance model over the top, so we know exactly what's happening with our data. We know exactly what's happening with membership for these areas. All of that is key to really building a model that's going to work for your organization. And once it's in place, and I really do mean this when I say it, once you've got a model in place, it's very self-sufficient. So, there's not so much tinkering or poking or prodding that you need to do, because everything's been thought out from the outset. You have your model in place, you've got your self-service, your automation, and even your approvals in there as part of that as well. So everything is kicking as part of the process. So there's no IT, Joe from IT, there's no Joe from, I keep calling random people that don't exist, I do apologise. But Joe from IT doesn't need to click a button to start the process. It's all very much led by the user themselves. Excellent. So into provisioning for M365. So just a few kind of key things or key ways that we can kind of look at this. So first of all, I want to have a look at the controls that we can do around this. So what we can do, and what I'll show you is a decent docs article during the demo session that tells us how to do this, and that's how to lock down the creation of M365 groups specifically to a small subset of users. So a group of users, a service account if we're using a provisioning service, or standard users, global admins, or people who have more of an IT lane. So they are the only people that can create teams or SharePoint sites or anything that's group connected. The reason why we do that is because then we're instantly taking that organic growth away and that potential for sprawl. Because we're cutting things, it's almost like cutting people off from being able to do these things, but in a really nice and kind of friendly way. But then you're already beginning to take control, because then we're delivering this spankling kind of provision kind of application or service where people can request the kind of workspace that they need. The only caveat with locking down this, especially when it comes to teams, is if someone is already the owner of an M365 group, then they can still create a team or teamify their group as part of their ownership. But this will stop anyone coming in and creating new kind of areas for collaboration. The other control is locking down access to third-party apps and teams, and I'll show you a bit about this during the demo, but I feel this is really important. We need to know the kind of applications that our departments, our users, our business is using, and they also need to be assessed. We need to understand where the data is going to live if the data moves. What security concerns do we have around that? And that really drives into this whole approvals process or mechanism as part of our wider provisioning model. So we'll talk about that during the demo. And then self-service methods. So we talked a lot about some of the kind of out-of-the-box solutions with M365 that can give you kind of key request capability. And when we talk about that, we really talk about these services here. So Power Apps, you can create a Power App that is, our mechanism for getting or gathering information from our user base or the person that's requesting the kind of the team or the SharePoint site. So we can then pass that through to our provisioning automation, or if we're using something like Proven, to our provisioning engine. To then drive the creation of that team, but then also drive the governance that goes around that. Likewise, we can use Power Apps with our Power Automate backend. As I mentioned earlier, some of the capabilities in Power Automate don't quite allow us to manage the entity once it's been created, but it does give us some basic kind of functionality there that we can, at least introduce from a kind of an introductory session or approach. Power App can be entirely forms-based. We could then also have just a form if we so wish to. A very basic kind of method of provisioning is we provide access to a form, we collect information, that information is stored in a SharePoint list, and then that SharePoint list is then fed in, or information is captured from that list and used in Power Automate to aid the creation of that element. But then, we will talk about Proven at the end. We've kind of built a solution that is scalable, and can have multiple front ends, custom front ends, existing front ends that allow you to be adaptive to your user base. But then it has the full power of the engine under the hood to drive the creation and governance end to end. So every element of that team or that group that we're creating can be managed and altered and changed and implemented as part of that engine itself. Excellent. And then governance. So a couple of things that we can utilize here. So approvals, that can be approvals, the approvals app within Teams that we can utilize for driving the approvals model. That could be someone receives a notification into Teams that they need to approve a request that's come through. They'll approve that, and then that can then kick on to the next part of the process. Likewise, we can use things like adaptive cards, which are JSON cards that are visible in Teams. I suppose one of the examples of this is, well, it's not quite adaptive cards, but it's still a card. And that is when you type a URL into a Teams chat, you get the little card that gives you a snippet of what that URL will take you to. So if you take that card and we add functions to it, so we add the ability to provide information or to approve things, then that's the full capability of an adaptive card. And it's fully JSON. There's even an adaptive cards builder tool as well. So that kind of card can be custom to the requirements that we have. I think one of the customers that we've kind of built a provisioning model for, we use adaptive cards to drive the approvals process, and this was prior to the approvals app being available, but it really does work, and it works extremely well. And aided by Power Automate, which can send an adaptive card and wait for a response, so it couldn't be any easier to use adaptive cards as part of the process. Cool. Sensitivity labels as well. So, container sensitivity labels, so labels that are applied to the SharePoint site or the team or the M365 group, are really important because they define what you can do in that group or that area. Whether that is we are making this an internal only kind of group, so maybe we're going to talk about business sensitive information, then we can apply a label to that team, which will lock down the ability to add external members to it. And likewise, we can have a secondary kind of label which allows the addition of externals and guests into that team, and that would be our external sensitivity label. And again, having these labels applied to our kind of our workspaces is going to kind of allow us to know exactly what sort of data or information is being discussed. So it works really well with sensitivity labels. Proven especially is able to apply sensitive labels at the provisioning kind of stage, so that we know the information based on what's coming through the self-service or our custom front end, and we're driving that information into the creation process within Proven itself. Not so much with Power Automate, it's a bit restricted and restrictive, so you'd have to use the Graph API to implement a lot of these solutions, which is something that not everyone is accustomed to or comfortable with, which is why using a service that uses that without you really needing to interact with it is probably key to kind of driving a really kind of great kind of provisioning model. And then reporting as well. So it's key to understand, what's being created that requires approval. How many teams have we created this month? How many, sensitive teams have we created this month? Including reporting and these capabilities is key to getting real analytics around, what your business is doing, how your business is evolving, and how the provisioning model is working for you. A lot of the tools that we use as part of even some of the self-service, the introduction or the basic self-service models, they have the capability of running reports, based on the SharePoint list or based on other factors, but it's all about understanding the full picture. And the full picture is not just how many of these are being created, but it's all about how many of this type are being created, or how many that include, this label are being created. And that's where things like, Proven or a more advanced kind of implementation of Power Automate can really assist there. Excellent. So what we'll probably do now is just step out into a bit of a kind of demonstration. So let me come out of the slides if I can get my mouse to work. And then what I wanted to just quickly touch on very briefly is the app templates for Microsoft Teams from Microsoft. Now, if you've not seen any of these or you've not used any of these, then I really encourage you to have a look and see some of the kind of capabilities here. There are some really good kind of tools here that kind of aid certain elements of your business. You know, a lot of them are feature rich. A lot of them are really basic in their kind of implementation, but they're all based on things like the Power Platform, Power Automate, Azure, all of this sort of kind of technology that is usually inclusive of your licensing model. But you've got some really good things here, like, you know, the company communicator and Fact Plus, which is almost a bot-based kind of informational bot. But lots of kind of other kind of good things. But what's one of these kind of templates? You know, I mean, as you can see, there's absolutely loads here that you could peruse for quite a long time. But we have a lot of kind of knowledge around these, a lot of kind of real world scenarios where people are using these. And I'm sure at some point we'll have a session or a webinar where we can talk about more around the kind of the templates and custom apps within Teams itself. But there's just one that I wanted to kind of highlight, and that's Microsoft's own kind of request a team app. Very basic. It is a Power app that uses Power Automate and a little bit of Azure. But it gives that sort of self-service mechanism to create or request access or workspaces to be created. You can see here that, you know, we've got the ability to see the requests, you know, that we've made in our tab here. We can approve requests if we're an approver. You'll only see this tab if you are an approver. But more kind of valuable is the ability to create a team. And we can see here, if I click on build, you know, I can select private or public. I can give all the team information, add members to that team, and then we can submit that as well, which will either submit it for approval or it'll submit it for kind of creation. So a few things to note about this app is it is just that. It will collect the information, it will store that information, it will provision basic teams and sites for you. However, it doesn't do anything like, you know, applying labels, applying templates, and things like that. But as an entry-level way of getting this in your organizations or your end users' hands, then this is a great thing. And because these are all provided as part of the kind of the Teams app templates, they're all completely you know, changeable, adaptable, evolvable. So we could even use this as a front end to our proven engine, you know, which is going to give that kind of nice entry level or entryway to people to request an area. But then we've got that kind of provisioning engine under the hood, which is going to drive the provisioning of those elements. And yeah, we can customize this, we can brand it, we can do whatever we wish. It just means modifying and editing the Power App itself. We built custom apps quite a lot with our customers, you know, custom entry points to our proven engine, you know, based on Power Apps. You know, collecting the business specific information that's required for the creation of these areas. And it's something that really does drive value. It's having this nice mechanism for people to request what they need, but then getting that information out the back end to ascertain whether you know, we're going to be talking about any sensitive data, whether, you know, there's any risk to that site or team. And that drives the approval and then subsequently drives what's applied or what governance we apply to that area as it's created. So some really kind of good kind of tools that we can tap into if we choose to. Cool. So what I wanted to do is just quickly show you, you know, how we can lock things down, but also tend to talk more about Teams apps themselves and how we can govern and manage Teams apps. So if we look at this docs article, and I'm sure we'll share this in the chat so that you have this. But if you've not already done this, then it's something to have in your repertoire for when you're ready to implement it. And what this does is this allows us to control the creation of groups to that subset of users, as I mentioned in the slides. So what we're doing here is we're locking down the ability to create new workspaces, new sites, new teams, new groups to that subset of, or that group of users that we define, whether that's a service account, if we're going to drive it via a provisioning engine like Provin, or we're going to use Power Automate to drive the simple basic creation of these entities. All of that can be controlled by introducing this mechanism. It's still very much PowerShell. There's a little bit of PowerShell that you need to run here to get that implemented. And you just need to have a group that you're locking that down to as well. But a great information on this kind of docs page that gives you the kind of mechanism to implement that. I've done this with a lot of customers, very simple to achieve, but the effect that it's had on the business, when we've introduced a self-service model at the same time, is astronomical, because we're now not seeing 100 to 200 sites being created or teams being created every week. We're now seeing 1 or 2 or 5 coming through for approval, coming through for particular use cases or particular requirements, and driving through the approval process and driving through into the implementation. So a good way of controlling that. We'll definitely share this with you after the call. So if we jump into the Teams Admin Center, so this is where we're going to have a look at Teams apps. So if we jump in here, then you can see, if I go into permissions policies here, that we have a bog standard kind of global policy that's applied to everybody within the organization. We can create additional policies here, or we can modify our global policy. But this is how we manage what apps are available to our user base within Teams. So if I jump into the global policy here, you can see in my dev tenant here, I'm allowing all applications. So that means that anyone within Teams can come into Teams itself, and they can select or install any app that's available in the Teams App Store. I find that quite scary. Hopefully, people on the call also find that quite scary, because that opens us up to potential data exfiltration. We're sending data to a cloud service. So I feel that apps should be assessed, they should be monitored, we should know what sort of applications that we have available within our organization. So what the recommendation is always to do is to lock down third-party and custom apps. Custom apps are kind of what you would create when you're doing a Teams app template, or if you've created a kind of app or developed an application in-house, you could add that as a custom app as long as it's in a Teams manifest format. You can add that as a custom app, but those can be controlled as well, because one of the other really good settings here is allow specific apps but block all others, which is what we would then do to achieve the ability where, once we've assessed an application, we then introduce it to the organization by applying this policy and specifying the application that we have approved. We can continue that on for more and more apps that we're approving or allowing or kind of making available within the organization, but we're still controlling access to the wider populace of enterprise apps. And there probably are quite some scary ones out there. And there's some really good tools that I utilize to assess those apps, or to find out how secure and how kind of compliant those applications are with governance. So locking that down in your kind of your global policy is such a good step to make, because you're instantly making only the Microsoft apps and the Microsoft certified apps available to the organization. And with there being thousands now of applications. Well, in fact, I think it's between 1 and 2,000. I think we've got in its entirety. You know, this capability, or looking down this capability, really does give you that sense of kind of comfort, that you're in a good place. We're not opening ourselves up for, you know, things like data exfiltration, etc. So having that sort of policy configuration initially is really important. But if we go into the Manage Apps here, you'll see that we've got this certification tab here. So we've got some things that are publisher attestation, we've got some things that are Microsoft certified, as we can see here with the Adobe Acrobat sign. What we generally advise is that anything that's Microsoft 365 certified is certified to be safe for your tenant. Therefore, data never leaves your tenant, and access to that app or service does not need a separate entity or separate identity to access it. So using something like you know, like cross-cloud collaboration and kind of identity management, you know, we're able to kind of manage these things solely within Azure Active Directory. So one of the things that's coming out around Microsoft Entra is a lot of that kind of multi-cloud capability, and that one identity over multiple clouds is something that's now entirely possible, and one of the key functionalities that will drive a lot of the kind of the advances within Azure Active Directory. I think it's a great kind of step forward from Microsoft, and something that's going to open up a lot of avenues for a lot of customers, which is good. But you can see here that we know which ones are certified by Microsoft, which ones are Microsoft apps, but we also know which ones that don't have any certification, or ones that have only got the publisher attestation, and that's where we'd want to assess those privacy policies, data lifecycle policies, to understand what they look like. So once we've controlled our applications by only making available the ones that we know the data resides in is safe within our own tenant, we can then start thinking about assessing the other applications as well. And one of the ways that we can do that is through Defender for Cloud Apps. So Defender for Cloud Apps gives us the capability, or gives us the cloud discovery capability as part of an E3 license or a business premium license, which really unlocks something that I think is wonderful, and that is the kind of software catalog, or the kind of the cloud app catalog. In fact, let's go to the portal itself. So if anyone that doesn't know, this used to be Cloud App Security, but it's now Defender for Cloud Apps, with everything now coming into that Defender umbrella. And I think it's grown arms and legs. It's such a great solution now, and something that's included, or at least a discovery element, as part of your E3 and your business premium licenses. So if I have a look at the Cloud App Catalog, then what I can do is I can look for, you know, Adobe or something along those lines. And as you can tell, I mean, in fact, if I take my search criteria out to there, you can see 31,270 applications have been assessed by this. And you'll find that most Teams apps, or apps that are provided via Teams, have a cloud service at the back end. And that cloud service will be within this Cloud App catalog, to allow you to assess what that kind of looks like. So let's go back to our search for Adobe. And we can see here we've got our risk score, and that risk score is based on the security and compliance and governance kind of capabilities of that service. So if I look at just say Adobe Creative Cloud as a general kind of approach, we can break down into general information about the product. You know, has it had any kind of breaches recently? And unfortunately, as we can tell from this, the last breach for the cloud, the Adobe Cloud, is October the 19th, 2019. So again, that would start me thinking, okay, what was the leak? What was happening? What data was exfiltrated? And all that kind of good stuff. But here we can see what governance and accreditations that they have as a cloud service. whether they're ISO accredited, whether they have SOC or SOX, and whether they have things like FERPA or COPPA or any of the other. Safe Harbor is another good one. Just to understand, how secure and how compliant those tools are. Whether they use MFA, whether they can use that Azure Active Directory as an identity, does it fit into your IAM model? All of this sort of information is available within the Defender for Cloud Apps. And you don't need to have the full license for Defender for Cloud Apps. All you need is the Discovery license, as I said, usually included within M365 and the Business Premium license. So you have access to this cloud catalog and you can assess these applications and make this a part of your approval process. One of the key things that's changing or coming soon, I think it hits next month, is within Teams itself. So if I actually jump into Teams, so I can show you if this has hit my tenant yet. Let's see if I can spell. And then what we'll do here is there's a new mechanism that's going to be available within Teams for any applications that aren't available to you. Then there's a whole kind of request process that's coming into play. Oh, it's going into someone else's tenant. Let's go somewhere else. Okay, it was that funky the end. There we go. This takes me into the right tenant, which I'm pretty sure it is, maybe. Because I mean, I don't know if you've kind of seen the store, but every application that you see in there has a card. So if I go into the apps, and if we have a look at any application, once it finally loads, I'll sing a song while we're waiting. Just about there. There we go. So if I go for, say, Viva Insights or Forms or something along those lines, you'll see we've got the card here. And what you could do if it's readily available to your business. So if we have it allowed in our permissions policy, is we can, open that application. We can, kind of add it to a team or add it to somewhere, a chat or whatever kind of app that is. But what's coming next month is this additional button that's going to pop up here, which is the ability to request access. And that'll kind of can be driven into a provisioning model, so into things like Proven or into Power Automate, which can drive the approval process. To kind of drive that through our developed or kind of engineered kind of request or approvals process, so we can assess the application before we then make it available via our permissions policy. So another key capability that's going to make that model more accessible to our end users, which I think is a wonderful thing. And best of all, as I mentioned, it fits beautifully into our provisioning model as well. Cool, so let's jump back to the slides. Let me just share again. And what we want to do is just talk a little bit about enterprise provisioning. And that's where I want to discuss a bit about, Proven, about what our kind of tool can do for you kind of thing, and what that kind of looks like. So if we jump into the next slide here. So enterprise provisioning allows us to do more at scale. So we can manage the provisioning of containers, that's our sites, groups and teams, but also manage the templates that are used to create those elements. What labels that we're applying to those as well. So sensitivity to control who can be added to that team, and also membership of that team as well. So again, talking about this ownerless model, if we drive all of our teams creation through this provisioning engine, then what we're allowing to do is the fact that we don't need to have our teams to be managed or owned. They're all centrally owned by the service. So the management and changes to that kind of area or to that team itself can be driven through the provisioning model or the self-service portal. So it's a kind of great kind of way to kind of work towards, I kind of feel, So CompanyNet's proven engine is built to work alongside your custom self-service. So if you've got something already in place, if you've got the Microsoft tool already in place that I kind of showed you a little bit about, then Proven can be used as or the Proven engine can be used to back that up with the enterprise provisioning capabilities. So all of what we mentioned there, and we'll talk about in the next kind of couple of slides, is all capable. With that as the front end, the nice kind of Microsoft. Well, it looks like a Microsoft product. That is our front end, and then that feeds into our service or our engine at the back end that does all the fancy stuff. And that's definitely the what's going to be on the branding. It's all that fancy stuff is a key feature. He jests. It's built to use SharePoint APIs, Microsoft Graph APIs, and Azure. So Azure Logic apps, etc., to automate not just the provisioning of the sites, but also manage a multitude of aspects around the container, which makes it possible to adopt an ownerless model, like I mentioned a second ago. And that really is just about managing the removal of people from the team, the addition of people, the changes to the channels or the structure of that team or site. Using something like the kind of Proven engine at the back end to do that, it's going to allow you to kind of adopt this more centrally managed ownerless model, which is not a mandatory thing, but I think it's something that takes that kind of user error or takes that kind of individual management and administration kind of dependencies from your user base and puts it in the hands of the business, which is only going to help you in the long run. Cool. So we talked a bit about Proven, or we have done throughout today's session. But what I probably just want to touch on here is some of the kind of features, and I've probably already mentioned some of these, but it's worthwhile just stepping through them again. So key points here is we can apply SharePoint templates as part of that provisioning engine. We can apply Teams templates, so that's the structure, the visibility, the kind of the way that our team kind of looks. We can set permissions, so who are the members of that team. If we're talking about a SharePoint site, then more granularly, then it's permissions to the document libraries and other things like that. Default column values can all be set via the provisioning engine. Sensitivity labels, which I think is key for any organization to have in place, not just about your documents and your kind of data, but also about the containers that contain that information. So how are we, protecting them, keeping our sensitive internal only data controlled or protected by this label to make sure that no external or guest people can be accessed. So they've got a really valid place within your governance model, and it's something the kind of engine is capable of. Visibility, being kind of, across all aspects, really, visibility of everything is key. Retention policies as well, we can apply via the engine. So, how long we want to retain these sites and data and kind of teams for, and then what we want to do after that period. So we can apply retention labels as part of the engine, as part of the service that we offer. And then full capabilities to use adaptive scopes as well when it comes to retention, but not just retention, but also with anything that we touch with adaptive scopes that's supported or mentioned in the features. The capability to use them is vital and something that's, you can't get with just out-the-box solutions like Power Automate as the automation engine. Cool. So just a bit of a kind of diagram here about how, I suppose, fluid it is, or how open it is to kind of use any front end. So we'll talk a lot about the Proven engine, which is the architecture that Paul's put in place. That is the beast. It's what does the creation of these elements. It does all the calculations and automation elements as well. But the front end is where your self-service really is key. And, we talked about a lot of this with the M365 slides earlier in today's session. But Power Apps is a key one, one that a lot of our customers choose to use. Gives you the method of using form-based approach or button presses or questioning. We can build something that's custom to the organization. You can build something that's custom to you with the low-code kind of approach. So a really good way of kind of developing a front end is to use something like Power Apps. SharePoint lists, so this data could reside, we could still be using Power Apps, we could be using a form, we could be using Proven's custom front end, but we could be using that SharePoint list to store that data, and that data or that information is picked up by the engine, and then the elements are created, throughout that process. Likewise, new requests can be added directly into the SharePoint list if that's a mechanism we want to achieve. And again, that can be picked up by the Proven engine to kind of deliver the item and kickstart the process. But then we've got things like custom front ends. So we can use the bot framework. We can create a bot using the bot creation tool. It can be a basic bot. We can just have a bot framework front end and a FAQ Q&A at the back end, or a Q&A, which drives the collection of information. And then that information can then be stored and then passed across to the Proven engine. So again, bringing that kind of, I suppose it's almost like the buzz at the moment, isn't it? People love bots, even though they're going to take over the world in a few years' time. Everybody loves them because they are not humans. but it's a great way of kind of front-ending this kind of provisioning engine by more of a conversational kind of mechanism. So, it's going to have a personality. It's going to talk about, why you need things. It's going to talk about asking you questions in a nice and polite way. But yeah, we can definitely use that as a front end as well. And then the Proven front end as well. So I mean, this can be, we've got Perform, we've got other kind of tools that we utilize for the front end of Proven, but it really is open to using numerous front ends. It will tap into anything that's based around kind of Azure and MEN 365 and Azure Active Directory, the graph. We can tap into a lot of different kind of front ends. So if you're already using something to provision or to request, your workspaces, we can kind of introduce the provisioning our Proven engine into that model beautifully. Cool. So just finally, just the benefits of enterprise provisioning via Proven. Templated deployment, so key when we're talking about governance. It's scalable, so it can handle 1 to 2 requests a week. It can handle hundreds of requests a day. Yeah, it's one of these services is entirely scalable to the amount of requests or your organization's requirements. So small, medium, large, it really doesn't matter. It just gives that governance and that control over the automation aspects of kind of delivering a provisioning model. Reporting and metrics all built into the solution, but we're also using tools and services that also have reporting mechanisms. So every aspect of this can be scrutinized and reported on so that we're able to give key information where it's needed. Advanced configuration administration. So again, these tools can be kind of administered and kind of used in any way that you see fit. But we really kind of introduce cutting edge modern technologies that are easy to administer and easy to maintain. So having that capability to kind of to build upon, we're then able to build or to introduce elements into the provisioning service, which allows us to do things like apply labels or do things that like apply, membership changes and things, purely because of the mechanisms that we're using to do that. It's also a subscription cost model, which I feel is definitely OpEx is the preferred mechanism now, with I suppose the introduction of M365 way back when, and it just works for a lot of organizations. So it can entirely be a subscription cost model, and it's scalable as well. So it depends on how much of the functionality you require and what you are going to be doing from a front end perspective. So it's entirely something that we can scale to you. And it's a service, not a product. So, any product is, we would kind of give it to you. You would buy it from us. You would use it. But what we provide is we provide a service around that. So we manage the service, we manage the product, we evolve the product, without the requirement for you to install new versions or install updates and things like that. It's a fully service model, and it's something that we entirely look after. And it's expert managed. So Paul, I'm sure will kind of hopefully get some questions at the end. Paul architected the solution. I think it's a wonderful tool. I think our customers feel it's a wonderful tool, but that's because of our passion around the tool. We built it to fit a purpose, and it's a purpose that it fills beautifully, and it's purely because of our expertise around every aspect of it. So as part of the service, you get our experts who are able to assist you with any aspect of building that model. Cool. So just finally, I know we're running short on time, but just finally, just about the next steps here. So it all starts by getting in touch. So, our experts can kind of help start you on the right foot, taking control of your tenant. But what do we do? So we get to know you, we get to know your business. That we feel that's really important. Understanding you allows us to understand the right model for you. We provide expert advice. I mean, every one of our kind of members of staff are experts across M365 and Azure, and we're here to help you through every step of the journey. And we demonstrate our passion about technology. I mean, I think one thing that's clear with the multitude of webinars that we've done up to this point is we have a passion for technology. And we feel that's really important because we want to introduce new things to our customers. We want to kind of help to evolve your business, to use the new technologies that are really, going to kickstart the way that you kind of productify your business and your productivity within the business. So lots of really kind of good things there. Cool. So I'm going to shut up now, and hopefully, I don't know if you've got any questions at all, but we'll open up for questions.
Thanks, Dave. Just before we take any questions, well, I mean, as Dave said, we're really keen to carry on the conversation around Microsoft 365 and provisioning there. So, and perhaps even how our provisioning engine Proven can help you. So if you're interested in getting in touch with us, you can visit us at company-net.com. URL's on the screen there, and drop us a line. I don't think I saw any questions coming into the Q&A. Oh, I did. Shay asks, how does the lockdown affect services like task planners for users that rely on groups? I think that was quite early in the.
Yeah, so locking, I mean, just simply means that if anything is Microsoft 365 grouped based, or it's built around a group, that the creation of new areas or new elements will be controlled by that capability or that lockdown. So anything that's group centric, so modern SharePoint sites or teams, we're stopping the ability to freely create those elements, but you can still add a tasks board to a team that you already are part of, or add a tasks or kind of planner board to anything that you can currently own. It doesn't lock down that capability. It's only with the creation of teams and modern SharePoint sites.
I had a question, which was you mentioned the use of Power Apps and automation within your provisioning model. Is that something where AI or machine learning could be brought in as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think machine learning and AI within Microsoft in general has come on leaps and bounds. AI Builder, for example, is something that a lot of people are using to automate a lot of really tedious kind of processing forms and various other mechanisms. But you can use AI especially to drive a lot of decisions around the kind of provisioning app. So when you're asking particular questions, depending on the answers, it's learning about what your capability or what your requirements are, and then it's going to suggest a model or suggest a a kind of structure or a template that's right for you. So I think bringing that into that sort of model is a wonderful thing. It's not something that's accessible to a lot of organizations because cognitive services with Microsoft is relatively expensive, but it's extremely worthwhile, I find, and it's definitely something that's going to evolve over time. Hopefully that helped.
Excellent. Okay, well, we're already over time, so I think we'll call it there, but thanks very much for that information, Dave. And I think it's clear that the tools that Microsoft provides can get you to a certain point, but I think above a certain number of users, people have to start thinking about enterprise level provisioning apps like Proven. Great, so just like to thank you all for attending this morning. We will be sending out a recording to all if there was anything that you missed there. And as I said, if you have any further questions or want to talk to us more about any aspect of M365, just drop us a line via company-net.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.